March 2019, Charlotte, North Carolina. And when Cooper's chisel hit the wall, something sounded off. It wasn't hollow. Cooper stopped. He lowered his tool. Hit it again. Same sound. Solid. Metallic. Dense. The kind of sound that tells you something is there that shouldn't be. And just like that, the most ordinary moment of a renovation morning turned into something else entirely. It was a dusty room, an old basement, the lower level of a two-story stone house built in the 1940s in one of Charlotte's oldest neighborhoods. Outside, a spring rain was drizzling. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, yellow, flickering, like something out of a movie. And Cooper stood under that light and looked at the wall again. Plaster. Old, thick, cracked plaster. But underneath it, something else. He reached for his phone, called the person overseeing Jordan's crew. "There's something here," he said. Just that. Before I tell this story, I need to say something. This was a story that could have ended before it ever began. Jordan didn't have to buy that house. Cooper didn't have to strike that wall. And even if he had, he could have kept walking. But he didn't. And what followed, starting with the opening of a safe and ending with a city's longest kept secret finally seeing the light, became the most unexpected story of Jordan's entire decades-long history of buying property. Let's go back to the beginning, the story of the house. In the fall of 2018, Jordan's team was looking at several properties in Charlotte. Long before he became owner of the Hornets, Jordan had deep roots in North Carolina. He grew up here, he learned basketball here, and after taking over the Hornets, his connection to the city had become something more than business. Not just the arena, not just the team, but a genuine desire to touch the fabric of the city itself. The property that showed up on the team's radar was in Charlotte's historic Dilworth neighborhood. A house with a clay tile roof, a wide front porch, heavy oak doors, built in 1942. Two separate families had lived inside it over the course of 80-some years. The most recent owner hadn't used it in years. It had been inherited, but the heirs lived out of town. The house had started to fall apart. Rotting porch boards, moldy walls, a leaking roof, but the bones were solid. And for a house in a neighborhood like this, the price was more than reasonable. Jordan's advisors brought the proposal to the table. Buy it, restore it, then either resell it or turn it into a community project for the area, part of the effort to preserve Charlotte's historic fabric. Jordan gave the green light, and Cooper came into the picture. Cooper was one of Charlotte's local craftsmen, 42 years old, big-framed, hands always stained with plaster and paint. He'd been doing this for 18 years, restoring old houses, bringing them back to life without tearing them apart. In Charlotte's historic neighborhoods like Dilworth, Myers Park, and Elizabeth, dozens of homes owed their second life to his work. Jordan's team had first worked with Cooper back in 2016 on another restoration project. Meticulous, honest, someone who loved his work almost too much. The kind of guy who could say, "Don't touch this wall. This house is breathing," and mean it completely. On a rainy Monday morning in March 2019, Cooper walked into that old house with his crew. The first floor was in decent shape, visible damage but fixable. The second floor had some more serious moisture issues. But the basement was a whole different story. Plaster had crumbled off the walls. Parts of the floor had caved in, and as Cooper struck the walls to assess the structure's foundation, he heard it, the sound. When they chipped away the plaster, what they found looked ordinary at first glance. Steel, dark gray, embedded in the wall, sealed behind plaster. A mid-sized safe, roughly 20 inches tall, 12 inches wide. A broken seal on the front. Rusted hinges. An old-style lock mechanism, likely from the 1970s or 80s. Cooper didn't touch it. He'd done this job long enough to know. Old houses had old things inside them. Coin collections, old documents, small valuables. Sometimes nothing at all. But this safe was different. It had been plastered over, like someone had wanted it invisible. "Get word to the owner," he told his crew. When the team reached Jordan, he was in Charlotte. He had a meeting at the Hornets practice facility. But the moment he got the news, he came to the house. It was a little past 3 in the afternoon. Rainy. Jordan made his way down to the basement while Cooper stood behind him. Quiet, waiting. Jordan looked at the safe for a long while. Then, "Can we open it?" Cooper shrugged. "Looks like an old-style lock. We can call a locksmith, or we can cut through it with the right equipment. Either way, there's going to be some damage. Call a locksmith." An hour later, the locksmith arrived. Spent 45 minutes on it. And finally, that rusted, stubborn lock gave. The safe door swung open, and the room, that basement under that yellow bulb, took on a different kind of weight. Inside, there were three things. First, a bundle of old bills wrapped in thick rubber bands, sealed inside a plastic bag. American dollars from the 1970s. Cooper estimated later that it was a few $1,000s, not a fortune by today's standards, but serious money for 40 or 50 years ago. Second, a yellowed envelope, its corners gone brittle, tucked inside a plastic document sleeve, sealed shut. On the front, in handwriting, a single line: "If this is found, it is true." Third, and it was this third thing that changed everything. A small, velvet jewelry box, light blue. Inside, a gold chain medallion, worn, darkened, and on the face of the medallion, engraved in small letters, Diana, 1972. Jordan looked at that medallion. He clasped his hands behind his back. Didn't touch it. "Cooper," he said quietly, "nobody comes in here." Then he pulled out his phone and called the police. This is where the interesting part of this story begins. Because why did Jordan call the police? Was there something illegal in the safe? A weapon? Drugs? No. On the surface, the safe didn't contain evidence of a crime. Old money, a sealed envelope, a medallion. But when Jordan looked at that medallion, at those words, Diana, 1972, he felt something wake up inside him. In this city, in this neighborhood, something left behind from 1972, and someone had hidden it, plastered it into a wall, for years. If this is found, it is true. That sentence was everything. And if this story already has your skin crawling, right now is the perfect time. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. I tell stories like this every single week, and we're just getting started. Detective Desmond from the Charlotte Police Department was 65 years old that night, with 6 months left until retirement. In 37 years on the job, he'd seen every corner of Charlotte: murders, robberies, fraud, disappearances. But on the morning after his 65th birthday, when the call came in, a safe found in the basement of a historic house purchased by Michael Jordan, Desmond paused for a moment. He wondered if this might be the last big case of his life. He got in his car. By the time he pulled into the Dilworth neighborhood, it was past 6 in the evening. The sky was getting dark. Out front, 2 police cruisers, Cooper's truck, and the SUVs belonging to Jordan's team. Desmond went down to the basement, looked at the safe, studied the contents, leaning in, not touching. And when he got to the medallion, he stopped. Diana, 1972. Desmond straightened up, scratched his head, stayed quiet for a long moment. Who was the last person to actually use this house, he said. The answer came within a few hours. The most recent owner was a former Charlotte businessman. He'd passed away in 2011, left the house to his heirs, but the heirs had neither sold it nor used it. It had just sat there for 7 years. The owner before that, the same family, from 1968 to 2011, 43 years. And the central figure of that family, the man who moved into that house in 1978, had been one of Charlotte's former county commissioners. Desmond found his name in the records that night. He'd been active in local politics for over a decade. In 2011, he died of a stroke. Desmond closed his notepad. Diana, 1972. That name was stirring something in him. Something faint and frayed. Something heard years ago. Something that had made it into the records but had never been resolved. But what, exactly? He went back to the office that night, opened the archives, and at 2:05 in the morning, he set a yellowed 1974 file on his desk. The header read, Diana Calloway, missing person, last seen, October 1972, Charlotte, North Carolina. Diana Calloway was 24 years old, a nurse. She worked at St. Francis Hospital, early mornings, late nights at the hospital, church on weekends, piano lessons. That's how people who knew her described her. Steady, reliable, someone who showed up at the same time every morning without fail. On a Friday night in October of 1972, she walked out of work and was never seen again. Her car was found 2 days later on the side of a highway south of Charlotte, empty, her purse on the seat, key still in the ignition. Diana was gone. Her family opened an investigation. Police treated it as a missing persons case. In 1970s America, in a small southern city, a young woman disappearing. Investigations weren't always conducted with the thoroughness we'd expect today. Unfortunately, there were a few witnesses. A nurse friend who said she'd seen Diana talking to a vehicle in the hospital parking lot that night. A big car, dark-colored, a dark figure inside, but no plate number. The description was vague, and the investigation, slowly buried under other files, was closed. Diana Calloway was never found. Her family put up signs for years, ran ads in newspapers. But 1972 became 1973, became 1974, and Diana quietly faded into the invisible names in Charlotte's memory. As Desmond read through that file, he felt his hands trembling. Diana, 1972, the medallion in the safe, the sealed envelope. If this is found, it is true. Someone had put that safe inside the wall. Mid-1970s? Early 80s? Unknown. But someone had done it. And that someone, the former owner of that house, the county commissioner, had died in 2011. So he couldn't talk anymore. But that envelope could. Desmond sent the envelope to the forensic lab. Fingerprint analysis, handwriting comparison, and most importantly, opening the seal. He waited 48 hours for the results. There was another thread to this story. When Jordan returned to the scene, he asked Desmond a question. How do we actually know this safe goes back to the 70s? Who would know the most about the history of this house? Desmond thought about it. Whoever manages the Charlotte History Archives might. The next morning, Aria from the Charlotte History Foundation was standing in front of that old house. Aria was 35. An archivist, a historian, someone who knew Charlotte's historic neighborhoods block by block. Thin framed glasses, always a folder tucked under her arm, an answer ready for almost any question. But she wasn't ready for this one. When Jordan's team asked her about the house's history, Aria buried herself in her computer, and 2 hours later, she came back, her face pale. The person who lived in this house from 1968 to 2011, she said, was one of the few people who gave a statement in the 1972 Diana Calloway missing persons case. The room went silent. He said he was a neighbor, Aria continued, said he never saw Diana that night. A beat passed. But Aria stopped, took off her glasses. There's a 6-month gap between the date that statement was given and the date he purchased this house. Why would someone plaster a safe into the wall of a house they were just moving into? The answer to that question came 48 hours later. The forensic team opened the envelope. Inside were two things. First, a 2-page handwritten text. Old, shaky handwriting. The person who wrote it was clearly either very old or sick, or trembling under the weight of what they were putting down on paper. The text began like this. I felt I had to write this confession before I die. I accept God's judgment, but I want human justice to know as well. Second, a small photograph with a cracked frame, black and white. A woman, young, wearing a nurse's uniform, smiling. On the back of the photograph, a single word, Diana. Let's stop right here for a second, because right now, you probably have a dozen questions running through your head. What was in that confession? Did the old owner of the house write it? What happened to Diana? And Jordan? Where does Jordan actually fit into all of this? I'll get to all of it. But first, to understand the wave this discovery sent through Charlotte, you need to meet one more person, Bruno. Bruno had spent 84 years in the house directly across from that Dilworth home. He was 87 years old. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be. His legs ached, but his memory was still sharp as a blade. Desmond knocked on Bruno's door that second morning. Do you remember 1972? Desmond said. Bruno let him in, put on some tea, and sat down. You're asking about Diana? Bruno said. Desmond paused. You knew her? Everybody knew her, Bruno said. Beautiful girl, hard-working. She was a nurse. He stopped, held his cup. I saw her that night. Desmond pulled out his notepad. Bruno told it like this. That Friday night, October 1972, late. He'd been looking out the window, the way older people do on sleepless nights. The street was dark, but right in front of the house across the way, the house where the safe would later be found, a large, dark-colored car was parked. And next to that car, two figures, one young, small-framed. When he later saw Diana's photograph, he recognized her immediately. That was Diana. The other was the owner of that house. Yes, his neighbor, someone he knew well. Were they arguing? Bruno shook his head slowly. I don't know, it was too dark. But Diana's voice was raised. Then the man got her into the car, and they drove away. Why didn't you say something back then? Bruno was quiet for a long time. I did, he said. I told them. I specifically mentioned the neighbor. The detective at the time said, that's impossible, he's a county commissioner. And I was an immigrant. I was new to this country. I already knew whose word was going to be believed. Desmond set down his pen. According to the forensic report, The handwriting in the envelope found in the safe, while DNA verification wasn't possible, had characteristics consistent with the last known owner of the house. Not definitive, but plausible. And the content of the confession was this. The man had gotten Diana Calloway into his car that night. An argument had started. Diana had found out he was involved in corruption in the hospital's contracting process, most likely through records at the hospital, and she had told him she was going to report it. During the drive, the argument escalated. The man panicked, and the confession broke off there. The page had been torn. Only one sentence remained at the top of the second page. Somewhere south of Charlotte. I can't remember exactly anymore. I haven't slept in 40 years. There was nothing more. When Desmond read that page, he closed the file. A 47-year-old case. One woman, one confession, and the man who wrote it no longer alive. What did that mean legally? Very little. You can't charge a dead man. If Diana had family, aging by now, her parents possibly gone, siblings if she had any, maybe they could be given an answer. Maybe. But even maybe, 47 years later, was something. Jordan asked Desmond to read the confession out loud. "Read it," Jordan said. "All of it." Desmond read it. Jordan walked to the window, looked out at Charlotte's morning light, stood there for a long time. "Does Diana have any family left?" he said. Desmond had already looked into it. "A brother, lives in Charlotte, 80 years old." Jordan turned around. "Find him. Edward." Diana Calloway's brother Edward lived in a small house on Charlotte's east side. He was 80 years old, retired, widowed, and Diana's photograph still hung on his living room wall. A picture from her youth, in her nurse's uniform, smiling. When Desmond knocked, Edward opened the door immediately, almost like he'd been expecting someone. "Is this about Diana?" he said, before Desmond even showed his badge. Desmond stopped. "Yes." Edward looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "I'll put on some coffee." Edward spoke like this. "I waited for this news for years. Sometimes I hoped it would be good news. Then I just wanted any news at all. An answer. Just one answer." Desmond described the items from the safe, described the medallion. Edward's eyes filled. "I gave her that medallion," he said. "A birthday gift. Early 1972. I had her name engraved on it. Had Diana put on it, and the year she was born. She never took it off." Silence. "Did you find her?" Edward said. His voice was barely there. Desmond nodded slowly. "Not yet, but now we have somewhere to start." Edward cried that day, for a long time. And Desmond called Aria at the archives. "Are there any closed-off or abandoned properties in the south part of Charlotte from between 1972 and 1974, he said. From that period. Aria did the research. 3 days later, she called back. "There's a piece of land," she said. "Southwest Charlotte. It was registered under the commissioner's name in 1968. Sold to a construction company in 1975. There's a shopping center on it now." Desmond hung up the phone. Under a shopping center. This legal process was now in the hands of the Charlotte Police Department. It wasn't something Desmond could carry alone anymore. The district attorney's office got involved. A forensic archaeology team got involved. Property records were examined. Jordan followed the whole process from a distance. His team kept him updated regularly. But there was something else on Jordan's mind. That house, that basement, that yellow bulb. And the moment Cooper said, it wasn't hollow. One day Jordan went back to that old house, not alone. Cooper was there, and so was Desmond. But he went quietly, not to talk. He went down to the basement. The safe was gone. It was in forensic custody, but there was still an open wound in the wall, plaster stripped away, a hollow gap. Jordan looked at that gap. 47 years. One woman, one medallion, and the sentence, "If this is found, it is true." Someone had concealed a crime. But because they couldn't fully forget it, or because their conscience wouldn't let them, they hadn't thrown the evidence away. They'd kept it, sealed it inside a wall. Maybe some part of them, buried deep down, wanted someone to find it someday. Maybe they simply couldn't bring themselves to throw it away out of fear. Maybe both. Those questions no longer had answers. Jordan turned to Cooper. "We're going to restore this house," he said. "But one thing is going to be different." Cooper waited. "The basement stays exactly as it is. That gap doesn't get filled. And we're going to create a small memorial here for Diana Calloway. Her name will be written here. She lived in this city for years. She disappeared. She was on the verge of being forgotten. The least this house can do is remember her." Cooper nodded. "We'll take care of it," he said. The work carried out by the district attorney's office and the forensic archaeology team took months. The old land parcel in the southwest corner where the shopping center now stood, had changed hands multiple times and had been built over. The excavation was difficult and uncertain, but in September of 2019, 6 months after Jordan's team found the safe, the forensic archaeology team reached a finding. A local Charlotte newspaper ran a short story, New Development in Missing Persons Case from 1972. The full details were not shared with the public. The investigation was still ongoing. But Edward, Diana's 80-year-old brother, received a phone call from the district attorney's office. He didn't share publicly what was said. But that day, for the first time in 47 years, he sat in front of Diana's photograph and didn't cry. "I know now," he said. Just that. We will never know the full story completely, because one piece is missing, and it will always be missing. And that is the heaviest burden of stories like this one. But what we do know is this: a basement, a safe, a medallion, and questions that for 47 years no one had asked, or had asked and never gotten answers to, finally, by chance, began to find their answers. When Jordan approved the purchase of that house, he didn't know Diana Calloway's name. He didn't know about the medallion. He didn't know about the confession. He just wanted to restore an old house. But sometimes in this world, that's how things work. The house, renewed. In early 2020, despite pandemic delays, that Dilworth house was restored. The porch boards were replaced. The roof was repaired. The interior walls were cleaned up. The first floor was turned into a small community gathering space for one of Charlotte's historic neighborhood initiatives. And the basement, just as Cooper had said, was left as it was. That stripped, plaster-bare gap was framed behind glass. A small metal plaque was mounted beside it. The plaque read, "Diana Calloway, 1948 to 1972. She lived in this neighborhood. She left a mark in this house. She was not forgotten." Edward came one morning to see that plaque. Desmond walked with him. The two of them went down to the basement. Edward read the plaque, stood there for a long time, put his hand against the glass. He didn't say anything, but when he turned to leave, on the very first step of the staircase, he stopped. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't clear whether he was saying it to Desmond or to Jordan. Maybe both. Maybe just to that gap in the wall. Then he walked out, and in the daylight, he made his way across Dilworth's wet grass. Jordan's silence. Jordan never shared this story publicly. No press release, no interviews. The Charlotte Observer wanted to cover it. Jordan's team politely declined. Why? He'll probably never say, but we can figure it out. Because this wasn't a hero story. It wasn't a Jordan did something good story. This was a small fragment of justice that a woman had been denied for 47 years, and turning it into press material, making Edward's grief, Diana's memory, into content, just didn't sit right with Jordan. Some things are done quietly. James Jordan had already taught his son that, at a picnic table, in the middle of the night, without expecting a single thing in return. And right here is where I want to stop and ask you something. How many safes are there in our lives? How many things, hidden, buried, made invisible, are sitting all around us while we have no idea? Diana Calloway wasn't inside a safe, of course, but her story, her name, her medallion, the testimony of the people who knew her, had spent decades waiting inside the wall of that house, locked inside a pound of steel. And if Cooper hadn't cut that wall open, if he hadn't chipped away that plaster, nobody would have ever known. So how much plaster like that is around us? Things we've covered over, walked past, told ourselves are in the past now. I want to ask you that question. Write it in the comments. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you ever come face to face with a truth that turned out to be far older than you expected? I genuinely want to hear your answer. And this channel is here every week to ask exactly these kinds of questions. Subscribe, hit the bell. Let's keep going. Desmond's last case. Desmond retired in December 2019. At his retirement ceremony, the department chief gave a short speech, talked about 37 years on the job, talked about cases solved, and at the very end he said this: Desmond's final case shed light on an investigation this department was never fully able to close 47 years ago. This isn't an ordinary achievement. This is an answer given to a family. When the applause came, Desmond didn't stand up. He just sat there, hands in his lap, looking at the city map hanging on the wall at the far end of the room. On the first morning of his retirement, he drove south of Charlotte, stood in front of the shopping center, looked at it for a while, turned around, went home. Cooper's words. While restoring that house, Cooper developed a habit. Every morning he'd go down to the basement, to grab his equipment, to check on things. sometimes without even fully knowing why. But every time, he'd stop in front of that gap and look at it for a minute. "Strange feeling," he said afterward. "Like that house had been waiting for someone to hear that sound. I just happened to be there that morning." That sentence to me is the heart of this entire story. I just happened to be there that morning. How many things in life work exactly like that? The right person, the right moment, the right sound. And when someone hears it, they stop. Aria's archive. After this case, Aria began rewriting the history of the Dilworth neighborhood. In a document she prepared for the Charlotte History Foundation, she gave Diana Calloway's story the space it deserved. The social fabric of the neighborhood in the 1960s and 70s, how missing persons cases were handled during that era, who the system worked for, and who it didn't. That report entered the Charlotte City Archives. Anyone can read it now. Diana Calloway's name is no longer listed as missing in a file. It's written into history. March 2019, Charlotte. And when Cooper's chisel hit the wall, something sounded off. It wasn't hollow. That safe carried 47 years of weight, a woman's name, a brother's long wait, a truth a city had swept under the rug. And Jordan, a man who bought a house, made an investment, wanted to restore a neighborhood, walked into that basement that morning and came face to face with something. Something money couldn't buy, something fame didn't bring, just being there, hearing that sound, and making the call. Sometimes doing the right thing looks this simple, but we all know how hard it actually is. Because when Cooper heard that sound, he could have kept going, could have said, "Old houses make noise," and moved on. Jordan could have looked at that safe and said, "This isn't my problem," could have handed it off and walked out. Desmond, 6 months from retirement, could have never opened that file, could have said, "Who's going to chase this down now?" But nobody walked past. And those small back-to-back decisions, to stop, to look, to search, broke 47 years of silence. How many times in your life have you said, "This isn't my problem"? How many times did you hear that sound, that dense, metallic, out-of-place sound, and just keep walking? I have. We all have. But this story is telling us something. Sometimes stopping is enough. Sometimes just saying, "There's something here," is enough. Life takes care of the rest. That house in Dilworth opened its doors in the spring of 2020. It became a small community center for one of Charlotte's historic neighborhood initiatives. Neighborhood meetings on weekends, workshops for kids, gatherings for older residents. And the basement, that gap in the wall plaque on the side basement, is open to school groups from time to time. Teachers bring kids down there to show them that history doesn't only live in books. Diana Calloway's name is written on that plaque now. Small, modest, but permanent. Cooper is still working in Charlotte. Same job, restoring old houses. But now he's learned to pause for a moment before striking every wall. Because sometimes, he says, walls talk. You just have to listen. Desmond is retired, but he's not sitting still. 2 days a week, he volunteers in Charlotte's cold case archives. In his own words, to close the files that never got closed. After the last great case of his life, so there won't be any more Diana Calloways. After completing that history report, Aria was appointed to the Charlotte City Council's Historic Preservation Advisory Board. She's not just archiving the past anymore, she's making policy to protect it. Edward is 80 years old. Every Friday morning, he walks to that Dilworth house. He doesn't go down to the basement anymore. His knees won't allow it. But he sits on the porch steps, stays for a while, then gets up and goes. The neighbors know him now. Diana's brother, they say. They wave hello. Edward waves back, smiles. He hadn't felt this light in 47 years. The gap. And that gap, that hollow space in the wall, preserved behind glass. It's not there to hide something anymore. It's there to remind. Because that safe had waited, stood there until someone found it. And while it waited, until someone opened it, everything inside, every piece of evidence, every confession, every trace had stayed hidden. What this safe tells us is this. Some truths exist before you're ready for them. They wait for you. The question is, when you hear that sound, will you stop? There's still a shopping center sitting on that piece of land in Southwest Charlotte today. People shop there, park their cars, grab a coffee. Most of them have no idea what happened there, but now you know. While telling this story, I noticed something. Jordan's role in all of this is actually very small. He bought a house, he found a safe, he called the police, he made a few decisions. No grand sweeping moment, no spotlight, no applause, just small, right decisions, one after another. And that makes me think, Maybe heroism doesn't always happen in the big scenes. Maybe sometimes heroism is as simple as going down to the basement, hearing a sound and saying, "There's something here." Maybe you're in that basement right now. Maybe you're hearing a sound. That knock. Dense. Full. And walking past is so much easier. But stop. Look. Ask. Whose Diana is waiting behind your walls? I wanted to leave you with that question. Write in the comments. What did this story make you feel? Have you had a Cooper moment in your life? A time when you heard something, stopped, and turned back. I read every single comment, every one. And if this story said something to you, send it to a friend. Because stories like this one mean something more when one more person hears them. Like, subscribe, ring the bell. I'll be back in a few days with another story just like this one. I'd love to see you here when I do. Until the next one, take care.